All right, I know I'm still waiting for a few people to join, but time is tight, so I'm going to get started with the presentation. I want to start in the place of acknowledgement. I'm honored to live, work, and raise my family on these lands. The land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Williams Treaty, and signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. This session is called Using Connection to Support Emotional Regulation in Kids. If anyone was at the keynote, this session actually supports the keynote speech very well about the idea of peaceful parenting. And this will look a little bit into the neuroscience that supports that concept. I'm Erin Chawla. I'm a teacher consultant, special education and inclusion, and I'm currently on the Autism Regional Services team. Today, we're going to talk about what is regulation. I use the term emotional regulation in this session. It's often referred to as self-regulation. We're going to talk about what it means for a brain to be in a flipped lid state, also known as a survival state, and the states that the brain goes through. We're going to talk about what to do about it, how to support your kids when they're in those states, and how to reduce those dysregulated moments. So what is emotional regulation? As humans, our emotions fluctuate all day long. Our bodies send signals to our brains that directly impact our capacity to cope with our environment. Emotional regulation is the ability to manage and respond to the emotional experience in a healthy and productive manner. Physiological inputs, such as how we've slept, if we're hungry, if we're too hot or cold, can directly affect our emotions. Also, social inputs, such as if we're getting along with those around us, the mood and regulation of those we interact with also impacts us. And of course, ongoing stressors, workload, financial stressors, health of our loved ones, all of those have an impact on our emotions. Children are not born with the ability to regulate these emotions. It must be modeled and developed over time. And it often has to be modeled, well, I would say it always has to be modeled again and again and again. Mammals are born with the fight, flight, or freeze response. An infant can startle, can squirm, which is sort of the baby fight response. But all the other regulated responses to distress must be learned through repeated calming, modeling, and comforting. It has to be taught. We're going to look at the work of Dr. Dan Siegel and his idea of the hand model of the brain. Hi, David. We're glad you're here. We just started, so you can just jump in. We're going to look at the work of Dr. Siegel and the hand model of the brain. So he said you could use your hand to model it. Your arm is the spinal cord that takes messages to the rest of the body. Your wrist is the brain stem that looks after, just let me admit everyone. Hi, we're so glad you're here. We're just diving into the hand model of the brain. So your brain stem looks after your heartbeat, your breathing, those automatic functions. And the thumb in this is representing the limbic system. That's the threat detector. That's the one that looks after, are we safe? Everybody's got it. It comes from birth. It does not develop much over our lives. It's pretty static. It's already full of everything it needs. If your fingers wrap around, that's the prefrontal cortex. In that prefrontal cortex, we've got everything we've ever learned. Our PIN number, how to conjugate French verbs, how to multiply and divide. Also, really important stuff like how to apologize, how to be empathetic. When that prefrontal cortex is working, we have access to all of that. Now, the brain develops from the front to the back, or from the back to the front, sorry, and from the bottom to the top. So we know this prefrontal cortex, which has a lot to do with our good decision making, is not developed in humans until about 25 or 30 years of age. So that means if you're working with anyone who's younger than that, as many of us are, they don't have that fully developed. They're still working on it, which means that they'll have a lot more trouble making those great decisions, keeping everything in mind. When we say the lid is flipped, the flipped lid brain, it's when the brain moves the access to that prefrontal cortex, all that good learning, so that limbic system, the fight, flight, freeze response, can take over. Obviously, in your brain, it doesn't jump right off, but the brain has those neurotransmitters that'll cut off that access. Because if you're hiking and a bear jumps into your path, you don't need all that, right? You don't need to have good decision making and saying, maybe I should go here, maybe I should go there. Your brain just wants you to react. So we're going to break it down a little further and look at what could be happening in our kids and our students in different brain states. So when that prefrontal cortex is online, it's working, we call that the executive state. This is where thinking and learning can happen. This is when your kids are calm and listening. The next state is the emotional state. The brain is deciding, with no input from us, whether it's going to flip to that survival state or whether it can be soothed back to the executive state. The lids are starting to slip off. The adrenaline and other neurotransmitters are getting active. They're deciding whether they're going all the way. That survival state is that fight, flight, or freeze. You're fighting for safety. In the executive state, kids are asking, what can I learn about the world? They're full of wonder, they're excited, they're in the calm state, have their lid on, they're open and ready. This is the state when you set boundaries, discuss expectations and values, play joyfully, build your connection, your relationship, read together, bake together. When kids are in this executive state, do all your family's favorite things. Understanding these brain states and the peaceful parenting that our keynote spoke about doesn't mean never setting limits. It doesn't mean not having rules. When your kid is in this executive state, when they're thinking and learning, that's when you can set those rules and have your discussions. And that's when you can have a lot of fun. When their brains move into the emotional state, you might know it because you might see whining, complaining. Kids might start saying no to directions. In this state, the kids are asking, the brains are asking, am I okay? Am I loved? Do I matter? Kids are starting to feel overwhelmed and they're checking in. Can you help me stay regulated? A good example of this state might be you're in a store, you're trying to get through the checkout, your child asks for a chocolate bar or one of those other high point impulsive sales things that are right at the cash. You say no, and they start to whine and complain. You never let me get anything. The job here is to be the leader. Let them know you see them. Oh my gosh, you really wanted that chocolate bar. Empathize, empathize. That's really hard that you're not going to get it today. I know how hard it feels when you really want something and you're not going to get it. Let's move through the checkout and we'll talk about it more. Now, that might work. We hope it works. Seeing them and recognizing what's distracting them often works. But their brains might shift into the survival state. So what we want to do in this emotional state is reassure, empathize, guide them through. Doesn't mean you have to give in and get them the chocolate bar. Just recognize the impact that has on them. Once they get to the survival state, it's fight, flight, or freeze. That thinking brain has flipped out of the way as soon as any physical actions are involved. Throwing things, hitting, kicking, running away, hiding. You know that kid is in the survival state. That lid has flipped. The first priority here is to increase a sense of safety and move the child out of this state back into the emotional or the executive state. It's all about co-regulation, and we're going to look at what that looks like. It's about bringing your calm to their storm. What to do, how to co-regulate when they're in the survival state. Reduce demands, limit verbal prompts. A brain in the survival state does not process language. It is only processing tone, the mood of the person saying the tone. If you say to them, if you don't stop hitting me right now, you're not going to get your iPad tonight, all they hear is the tone. That tone says, I'm still not safe. And they might continue in that survival state. Use your proximity wisely. Some kids love when you get in close to them and give them support. Some kids panic and will lash out more. So you need to decide how close or how far. But getting on their level will help. A brain in a survival state is looking for threat. So sometimes us tall adults standing over them feels like a threat. If you can lower yourself, get down on their level, it might increase feelings of safety. If possible, remove the audience and reduce sensory input, which is lights, noise, those kind of things. You want to reduce those. You can't always remove the audience. If your kid goes into that survival state in the park, in the store, grabbing them to get them to the car so that you remove that audience is going to spin them up. You can't always do it, but you try if it's possible. You need to model that deep breathing and calming. Telling them to calm down isn't going to work. They're not processing language. Showing them will help. Now, your brain might also be moving into an emotional state, especially if there's an audience, because our brains start thinking, oh, is everyone thinking of me? Especially if your kid is really triggering you, saying those I hate you or trying to hit or kick you. But you need to help regulate yourself. Offer a comfort item or a distraction. Now, am I telling you that your kid just kicked you and you're going to give them a stuffy? Maybe. Because the number one job is to move them into another state. When they're in that executive state, that calm brain, then you can talk about, we don't support kicking. It is not okay to kick here. What would have helped you from getting that worked up? Then you can worry about not giving them their comfort item. But at the time, your job is to try to move them into a calm state. So we're going to avoid those threats and bribes. We're going to move slowly. We're going to allow them more time to process because their brain is trying to get back online. And we're going to try to, once they start communicating, once they start speaking, then you can move to those emotional state strategies that we talked about. How to reduce those lid flips, how to keep them from getting into that survival state. It is going to happen. Kids are born to go through that, right? Your baby, your toddler cries and flips out a lot because they're learning how to keep it together. You have to show them again and again and again, but we do want to reduce them. And just a point, there are two main times in life when you might see a lot more of these lid flips. One is around age 2 or 3. There's a very big brain growth, which makes it harder for kids to regulate. And any of my parents of teenagers in here know the other one is around puberty. Kids can flip out over seemingly meaningless things because those hormones are fluctuating in the brain. So how do we reduce them? Increase joyful connection. When your kid is regulated, just be there, be yourself. You are always enough. They just want to know you as you. They just want that connection. Talk about your interests, values, stories. Tell them about your life. Share yourself with your child. Take part in their interests. You might not be a fan, but if they are interested, once I saw a thing on social media that said, learn the name of all your kids' squishmallows. My child, that's her special interest. That's been what she's been asking for years. And I've had to learn the name of every squishmallow. And now she tells me, she holds it up and says, what's this one's name? She's testing. Do you see me? Am I important to you? Do you still connect? And help them again and again and again to put those lids back on. Increase joyful communication. Recognize the brain states they're in and react accordingly. Don't give the rules when they're slipping into that survival state or that emotional state. See the state they're in and react accordingly. Greet them excitedly when they can't come home. Who doesn't want to be greeted excitedly? I'm so lucky to have a wonderful Labrador dog. She increases my joyful communication because she loses her mind when I come home every day. When it's possible, let them take the lead. And when it's possible, let them say no. Kids are always growing their independence and they want to know that they have some control. When it's the big things that really matter, don't let them say no. But when it's smaller things, let them have choice. Would you like to brush your teeth now or in 5 minutes? Would you like to use the blue toothpaste or the pink toothpaste? Give them a way to communicate. If you have a non-speaker or a minimal speaker, you want to provide ways for them to share their voice, pictures, visuals. There's a great free app for alternative communicators called Weave Chat. It's very robust and free, and you can use that to help your kid have a voice if they don't have a physical voice at the moment. And always model good communication, model saying you're sorry. You don't have to get this right all the time. Nobody's going to. We're all human. But model how to repair that relationship when we've made a mistake. Model it with your co-caregiver, your spouse. Show kids that we can always have good communication. Let's see, I've made it with 2 minutes to spare. So this is my last slide. This is what informed some of this work. You can take a screenshot. I believe they're going to share this with you, but also the recording will be online later. So there are many great people who've done a lot of work. Dr. Mona Delahook, Dr. Ross Green, Becky Kennedy, Jody Carrington is a superstar, and of course, Dan Siegel, who came up with the hand model, a few YouTube channels. And we still have a minute and a half for questions. Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask if you have any questions or feedback. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for coming. I hope I gave you something to talk about or think about and some ways to support your children when they're the different brain states and when it's best to do that teaching and learning and when it's best to do that empathizing, when it's best to just reduce threat. And it's perceived threat. Of course, your child might be safe, but their brains are saying they're not. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.